Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive what-if scenario about the Ice Age's most famous predator. We usually think of history as, well, totally set in stone. But honestly, tweaking just one single variable can rewrite the entire timeline of the planet. So we're pulling from real evolutionary data and fossil records to imagine the impossible. We are going to figure out what our modern world would actually look like if a specific, absolutely terrifying beast still walked among us today.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Our ultimate what-if hinges on the Quaternary extinction event. Picture this. Roughly 12,000 years ago, right at the end of the Ice Age, a huge environmental shift completely wiped out a ton of the incredible megafauna roaming the Earth. But what if our saber-toothed friend miraculously dodged that mass extinction? What if they somehow adapted, pushed right through that environmental collapse, and survived all the way to the modern day?
Right off the bat, before we start rewriting history, we absolutely have to clear up a major misconception. The legendary saber-toothed tiger? Yeah, it wasn't a tiger at all. That is a total misnomer. They were actually an entirely distinct species of extinct big cat, known as the Smilodon. They shared North and South America with woolly mammoths and giant sloths during the Pleistocene epoch, sitting on a completely unique branch of the evolutionary tree.
To really wrap your head around these creatures, you have to imagine a cat built like a bear. Seriously, they weighed in at a staggering 440 pounds. They were literally one of the largest carnivores living in North America back then. This was not some sleek, agile jungle cat. This was a heavy, grappling powerhouse designed for sheer, overwhelming brute force. And here's the wild part. They packed all of that incredible weight onto a surprisingly compact 5-foot frame. They were incredibly stout with really short limbs. Because of this heavily muscled, low-to-the-ground build, they definitely weren't built for long, sustained sprints across the open plains like modern predators. Instead, they were ambush hunters. They used pure grappling power to just wrestle massive prey straight to the ground.
Now, let's talk about the main event. Their most defining, terrifying feature is exactly what you're picturing right now. 8 inches. That is how long those massive canine teeth could grow. Just imagine an 8-inch serrated blade sitting in the mouth of a 440-pound bear cat. It's undeniably their coolest evolutionary trait, but as the research shows, looks can be incredibly deceiving.
This is where the biology gets super fascinating. You've got this wild contrast. On one hand, a Smilodon could unhinge its jaws to a terrifying 90 degrees just to clear those massive fangs. But on the other hand, their bite force was surprisingly weak. In fact, their jaws were significantly less powerful than modern big cats of the exact same size, like lions or jaguars. Believe it or not, those enormous canine teeth literally got in the way of biting down with any kind of crushing force.
Honestly, from an evolutionary standpoint, those giant fangs were kind of a curse. As scary as they looked, those massive canines were surprisingly brittle. If they bit down into a thick bone, they risked catastrophic damage. They snapped super easily, and a lot of times, they get completely ripped right out of the skull during a scuffle with struggling prey. And for an apex predator, losing your main weapon almost always meant starvation.
So how do you hunt if you can't bite down hard without breaking your teeth? You get precise. Because they couldn't crush bone, they had to use a surprisingly passive hunting method. Step 1, grapple the prey and deliver a single deep stab to the neck with those long canines. Step 2, immediately jump back to protect those fragile teeth, and Step 3, just wait. You simply wait for the victim to bleed out. It was a surgical strike, not a chaotic brawl.
Which begs the question, what exactly were they stabbing? Well, back in the Ice Age, they hunted in highly coordinated packs to take down massive mammals. We're talking a diet consisting heavily of juvenile elephants, ancient rhinos, and other huge, slow-moving creatures. It was an environment absolutely tailor-made for a heavy, pack-hunting predator with long, stabbing teeth.
Okay, so how does all of this build our alternate timeline? Fossil records show they popped up roughly 1.8 million years ago and did incredibly well right up until that Quaternary extinction 12,000 years ago. But let's jump across that extinction gap. If we pretend their ecosystem didn't totally collapse, what hurdles would they have been forced to overcome to make it to us today?
Well, survival wouldn't just be a stroke of luck. To make it to the modern era, the Smilodon would have to face down a rapidly warming planet, the total loss of their icy environment, and intense competition from a very familiar, highly adaptable foe, early humans. Surviving the extinction event was just hurdle number 1. Sharing a shrinking world with humanity, That was the real test.
To survive this gauntlet, they'd have to physically adapt. Natural selection would have stepped in immediately. Remember those brittle teeth? If bigger canines broke off easily on the smaller, faster prey of a warmer world, a Smilodon couldn't eat. So, nature would have literally forced their defining teeth to shrink. Over thousands of years, only the cats with smaller, much more practical canines would have successfully survived.
But shrinking their teeth wouldn't solve their biggest crisis. Their main food source completely vanished. The mammoths, the giant sloths, the ancient rhinos, entirely gone. So we have to ask a genuinely terrifying question. What would a pack of hungry, highly coordinated Smilodons eat? Since humans were rapidly spreading across the landscape, would they have resorted to hunting us? It's a chilling thought, right? But it's highly probable.
The Smilodon hunted in packs. With their slow-moving prey gone, it is entirely possible they would have adapted to ambush human hunting parties. Imagine being an early human moving through a dense forest and suddenly realizing you're sharing territory with a highly coordinated, desperate, 400-pound predator striking violently from the shadows.
But, as we know all too well, humans don't tend to stay the prey for very long. In a deeply ironic twist of fate, humans ultimately became the dominant predator on the planet. Instead of us being hunted, we totally turned the tables. Early humans would have aggressively hunted these big cats, using their incredibly thick fur for clothing and relying on their meat for survival, quickly pushing the Smilodon to the absolute brink.
To avoid complete annihilation from human hunters, hanging around our growing settlements just wouldn't be an option anymore. That fierce competition would push them away. They likely would have been forced into a long, brutal migration, following whatever remaining herds of large mammals were left, traveling far north into the freezing, desolate, and unforgiving environments of the Arctic or northern Canada.
Now, if they somehow managed to survive that grueling migration, fast forward to the modern era. These incredibly rare, exotic beasts would have a completely different relationship with humanity today. Rather than fierce competitors or a source for winter coats, they'd be revered. We would probably see them in historical portraits of kings and queens as the ultimate status symbol. And today, they'd be a highly guarded, fiercely protected species, watched over by conservationists.
So, ultimately, if they hadn't gone extinct, not much would actually change in our daily lives. Just like modern cougars, the surviving Smilodon would live quietly in the shadows. Because humans were the direct cause of their near extinction, they would instinctively stick to the remote, absolute coldest areas of the globe, doing literally everything in their power to avoid us entirely.
Which brings us to a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer on their alternate history. If these magnificent, terrifying beasts were still out there right now, prowling the freezing forests of the far north, do you think we could ever truly maintain a peaceful coexistence with them? Or would our history of competition just inevitably repeat itself? It's a pretty wild alternate reality to imagine. Keep being curious, and we'll catch you in the next one.